Hey, welcome to my channel, Psychotropic Release. Today I will be giving 10 tips to avoid having a bad trip. And if you're interested in all things holistic, mental health, and psychedelics, you've come to the right place, and I would love it if you would subscribe to seeing more upcoming videos. Now, my intention in making this video is for harm reduction purposes. Safety should always come first when using psychedelics. If you've been diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, such as schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, or have a history of mental illnesses such as this, be advised that it is not recommended to take psychedelics. Since we are talking about bad or challenging trips, we need to talk a little bit about our expectations when taking psychedelics or plant medicine. Psychedelics, whether it's shrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, what have you, all have the ability to show us things about ourselves we don't like or don't want to acknowledge, show us things we don't want to see, etc., whether it's about ourselves, the people in our lives, or our lives in general. Psychedelics can and potentially will bring up past traumatic events we've experienced in our lives. It's not unheard of people having to relive traumatic events during a trip. Now, I feel like a lot of people would constitute this as a bad trip, which I totally understand. However, a lot of people who choose to participate in psychedelics or plant medicine come in with the understanding that while psychedelics may bring this stuff up, it's part of the healing process. You can't work through something that you don't know or don't acknowledge. So psychedelics give you the ability to possibly be faced with very unpleasant themes in your life in order to have the chance to confront them and work through them. So just keep that in mind when you're considering going on a psychedelic journey. But let's get into the 10 different tools that can help you avoid having a bad trip. The first and maybe the most obvious thing is to think about is the dosage. The dose you take of your chosen psychedelic will greatly affect the experience you have. For instance, 1 gram of mushrooms may allow you to have mild visuals, while 5, 6, 7 grams of mushrooms may force you right into having an ego death. So definitely consider the intensity of the trip you're interested in having. If you're a beginner, you may want to work yourself up over time to test the waters, which I totally recommend doing. This is what I've done myself when I first started taking shrooms, so don't feel like you need to just dive in head first. Also, consider how strong the psychedelic is. If you're doing mushrooms, there are strains that are more potent than others, so also keep that in mind. Secondly, it's important to prepare in advance for a psychedelic journey. This really depends on which psychedelic you're going to do. For instance, with ayahuasca, you must prepare 2 weeks in advance, meaning no alcohol, no other drugs, even marijuana, no sex, and following a really specific dieta or diet. I could make a whole other video talking about the ayahuasca dieta. Simply put, it requires eating very cleanly, aka no processed foods, no dairy, no meat, no caffeine, alcohol, etc. This isn't required for a mushroom trip. However, it is said to possibly intensify the experience, and I personally think it's a nice practice to get into the mindset of a trip, which then comes to my second preparation tidbit. Mindset is also so important. So if you're particularly really struggling with your mental health, or you're going through significant life changes, especially if they're particularly negative, then it may not be best to use psychedelics. The third tip I have is that it's very much recommended to do is have a specific intention. I think it's important to be really clear with yourself on why exactly you want to experience this particular psychedelic, what you're looking to get out of the trip, and what is driving you to use psychedelics in the first place, etc. I really do feel that your intentions have the ability to kind of sway your journey, so really think through your intentions and what you want to get out of the experience. Intentions could be as simple as wanting to connect more with nature, assuming you're tripping outdoors, or it could be something potentially more serious like show me what I need to know, which can open the doors for a much deeper experience. So, set and setting is everything. The environment you're in is going to greatly affect your trip. So you need to consider where the trip will be taking place. Will it be outdoors, at home inside? Is this a recreational setting, a ceremonial setting? Or even if you're in a clinic, if you're doing ketamine therapy or MDMA therapy, if it's in a clinic or ceremonial setting, you don't really have much say or any say over the surroundings you're in. Like when I've done ayahuasca and bufo, it's been in a maloka or at the facilitator's place. However, I must say I really like malokas. I love how they're like both inside and outside. So you don't feel confined to being in an indoor space, but they're still structured enough where I feel like the psychedelic space is contained. If you're new to psychedelics, I would recommend being close to somewhere where you can go and feel safe and re-ground yourself. So you may not want to venture far from home if it's your first time tripping. Also, I wouldn't recommend tripping somewhere like a music festival where there's tons and tons of people and it can be really overwhelming and overstimulating. Again, especially if it's your first time, I tend to get really overstimulated having ADHD and being an HSP, so I always consider that when I'm planning a trip. This also goes hand in hand with the people you may be tripping with. You want to surround yourself with people you're fully comfortable with and safe with. If you have any hesitation tripping with someone, listen to your gut, listen to your intuition, because personally, I don't want to be in an altered state of mind with people I just don't trust or don't have the best intentions. For instance, right now, I only feel comfortable doing plant medicine with women, both female-led facilitators and participants. The last time I did ayahuasca, it was only with women, and the next ayahuasca ceremony I'll be going to is also only women. Of course, this is a personal preference, but I just feel much more comfortable and safe going into a really intense journey when I feel 100% safe. And at this time in my life, that includes not having men in the space. So if you're another woman and you're interested in plant medicine, that is something to think about. Also, trip sitters. You probably don't want to be tripping alone, so consider having a trip sitter with you. Again, someone who's ideally had their own experiences with psychedelics and someone you feel really comfortable with, and make sure you stay physically safe. Another thing is to practice for a trip is to not set too high of an expectation. I definitely have done this before, which has left me feeling really disappointed and frustrated after some trips. It's not the easiest thing to do when you've been planning the trip for some time and you start to build up that expectation in your head of what the trip is going to be like or should be like, and you're just doing yourself a disservice. There's absolutely no way to know how the trip may go, and the more expectation or control you put on the experience, the more it probably won't be a satisfying experience. Like any experience, if you set expectations high, the less open-minded you may be in going into it, which isn't going to allow you to be flexible in the moment. Now, the next 3 tips all go together. The first one being use grounding tools. So when and if the trip gets difficult, have some coping skills or tools ready to go. This could be doing breathing exercises, drawing, dancing, stretching, doing yoga, going for a walk in nature. I've heard people who use essential oils to ground themselves more if they feel like they're getting deeper than they'd like to go, which leads to breath work. The importance of knowing how to calm yourself down using your breath is crucial. Whether it's breathing exercises or knowing how to be more mindful of your breath, this is important because if the trip is really intense and you feel like you may be out of control, breathing is always something you could go back to and regulate and get in touch with. Regulating your breathing by making sure it's deep and even can level anxiety, and I've had many people tell me that breathing has helped them tremendously when they were in a very challenging trip. And the next thing is to surrender to the experience. Sometimes the best thing, if all else fails, is to lean into the experience and surrender to it. There's an interesting phenomenon where the more you try to control it, the more intense and uncontrollable the psychedelic experience becomes. This doesn't mean giving up. Surrendering does not mean giving up or harming yourself. It means trusting the psychedelic medicine itself or higher power if you are a spiritual person. The experience is temporary, it won't last forever, so you need to keep that in mind at all times. And last but absolutely not least is integrating your psychedelic experience after the experience itself. Tons of research has shown that integration afterwards is just as important as the experience itself. I've seen research where people tend to get more out of the experience psychologically if they have an integration process afterwards. And I've heard from shamans at ayahuasca ceremonies that plant medicine is only 50% of the work. You need to take any lessons you learn from the experience and apply them to your life. It's not unheard of that people go on ayahuasca journeys only to not integrate the lessons that they received and then later find that Mother Ayahuasca will show them the lessons that they didn't listen to previously much more intensely again. Also, if the psychedelic of choice is Bufo alvarius, reactivation is very common after a trip, which is something to be aware of and consider. Alright, so those were 10 tips to avoid having a bad trip. I hope this was helpful. If you have any other tips to ensure a good trip, it would be great if you could comment below and help out other psychonauts. And as always, if you're interested in hearing more about holistic mental health and psychedelics, I would love for you to subscribe.